Hello all, and welcome to Meanwhile in the West, my weekly video series where I go through my local newspaper, The West Australian, and criticise all the imbeciles, idiots and numpties who write into the letters to the editor with uninformed and unintelligent opinions. So, without further ado, let's get into this week's letters. Living in the Past, 3rd of April 2014. Critics describe the new Knights and Dames Awards as an anachronism dating back to our colonial past that has no place in modern egalitarian society. Why then do our lawyers and judges still wear those wigs in court? And why do we still have paid long service leave? Long service leave is an anachronism that dates back to our colonial past, allowing British expatriates time to travel by ship to England to catch up with family in the home country without losing income. It costs Australia billions of dollars. Surely, if we can fly to the UK in less than a day, those who feel the need to go back could do it during annual leave. If teachers and all public service servants didn't have paid long service leave, maybe the government would have more money for schools. As it is, despite today's teaching aids, children aren't getting anywhere near as good a basic education as we got in the 50s and 60s. Lynn Brown Wilson. Well Lynn, here's the thing. Firstly, what a nice rambling letter that was. So we managed to get from knights and dames down to the failures of our current education system. So let's start off with this idea of outdated and anachronistic things in our society. Yes, we do have outdated and anachronistic aspects of our society, like judges wearing wigs and possibly long service leave. This is not an argument for bringing back more outdated and anachronistic things like knights and dames. The other thing is that at least long service leave, and there is still a justification for it. It's not the same justification. If the only justification we had was for people to go back to England, then yeah, it would be anachronistic and we should get rid of it. As it stands, the current justification for it, the modern justification, is that it's a nice entitlement that people have managed to wring out of their employers. And that's good on them, and it's something we should keep because it's just part of the package. Now, you could get rid of it, but essentially in the free market, you would have to compensate those people in some other way. Otherwise, you wouldn't get people into the same jobs. Unless what you're advocating is just an across-the-board reduction in standards for working people. And so, yeah, you get rid of your 3 months every 7 to 10 years of long service leave and replace it with, what, another week of holidays a year? It's the same thing. You're not going to save much money. And lastly, this idea that today's education system is failing kids. One is just simply not true and has been shown not to be true. In fact, it's such an old chestnut that every generation says this about their current education system being poor compared to what happened in the past. That's just what that's just what it means to be conservative. Admittedly, if you look back on old exam papers from the 50s and 60s, they will seem hard to a modern audience. This is because the education system then was based on skills for jobs that no longer exist. So the kinds of skills you'll see people, really in-depth skills that people would have been pushed to learn back in the 50s and 60s, were things like manipulating fractions and doing arithmetic. The reason we don't expect kids to do that these days is because almost nobody uses that in their job. Almost nobody uses that in their everyday life. And if you do have to do that kind of stuff in your job or your everyday life, we all carry around computers in our pocket. So time is better spent at school learning things which are more important. And in fact, actually what it means is that we've essentially freed people up from doing the rote learning of the kind of the grind work of repetitive times tables and things like that to a large extent. And that's freed us up to teach children about the overarching theories and explanations for things. So kids actually have a much deeper understanding of the way things work and the way things fit together and the way our knowledge in one area overlaps with another area. In a way that doesn't boil down nicely into test questions necessarily. But is far more advanced than the kinds of questions they're asking, 50, 60 years ago, which were simply nuts and bolts kind of calculation questions. So I hope that explains things, Lynn Brown. Thank you very much for your letter. Next, Axing a Helpline, 3rd of April 2014. I was elated to hear Immigration Minister Scott Morrison say that most asylum seekers would no longer receive free legal help. New asylum seekers lose free law aid 31st of the 3rd. My feelings were quickly lowered by Shadow Immigration Minister Richard Marles, who described the cut as mean-spirited. One can't but help wonder where his loyalties to this country really lie. Ollie Renstead, Geraldton. First off, I find it kind of disturbing that you were elated to hear of cuts to legal aid and that your feelings were then lowered to hear somebody describe it as mean-spirited. But each to their own. Yes. So here's the thing, Ollie, if I may call you that. The legal system, especially immigration law here in this country, is very complicated. It's too complicated for the reasonably well-educated layperson to navigate on their own. It's certainly far beyond almost all asylum seekers to do anything with. So free legal aid was probably the only way they were going to access the kind of assistance that they needed to make sure that the system was fair. Now, I don't think there's ever been a suggestion that people were getting into this country as refugees unfairly due to them being overrepresented in court cases. I think everybody's accepted that at best you could say, the worst thing you could say is that the legal system to get in was fair. In fact, it's probably slanted away from granting people refugee status, and yet over 90% have been found to be genuine refugees. So if you deny these people proper legal aid and representation in the immigration process, you're almost certainly going to tilt the system further away from granting genuine refugees refugee status. And therefore, you are making the system far more likely to send people back to the persecution that they were facing, that they were fleeing to come here. That's in effect what you're doing. And the reason for it was going to save something in the order of $100 million out of the federal budget. $100 million is a drop in the ocean. And so it's a drop in the ocean for the budget, and yet it's going to ruin people's lives. And so on that basis, I think Richard Marles was right to say the cut is mean-spirited. It's not going to achieve much for the government except to make them seem tough to people like you who seem to think that that's a useful and moral way to behave. And then to say that to question somebody's loyalties based on their opposition to it. You seem to be suggesting that the only way that you can be loyal to, say, Australia is to, one, not be welcoming to genuine refugees in the pitiful numbers that we accept, or two, not question the government over its pathetic attempts at popularism and demonising of asylum seekers. For my money, loyalty to your country involves helping it become that which it aspires to be in the most moral way possible. That is, criticising it when it falls short of the standards that we should all be hoping for. Next letter. Wanted. Candidates to support WA. 3rd of April 2014. After seeing and hearing from the Senate candidates, I am disappointed that no one has stated that they will simply represent Western Australia and the people of WA. They want to represent their own political party, a single issue group, or their own personal platform. They make promises when they know that they cannot keep them. Why can't we have a person who will be straightforward? Person who will put the welfare of the majority of people of WA before all party or other issues, even if this differs from their personal beliefs. They don't need to make promises, just run on a platform of honesty, common sense and respect. A single senator may not change the world or government policy, but a single senator who speaks up for the majority could make a difference and ensure we get a hearing. Peter Kerwin, Salter Point. Oh, Peter, I feel kind of sad for you. Obviously, politics is complicated for you, and obviously you struggle to understand the policies and platforms that the various parties have, and to sort through that to find which agrees most with what your policies or platform would be, and the things you agree with, or what you think would be best for WA. And so we have this plea that can't we just have somebody who'll stand up and tell us that they are honest, that they have common sense, and that will treat us with respect? See, Peter, that's the problem. They all say that. And deeper, the problem is that they all mean it. The vast majority of politicians honestly think they are doing the right thing for the majority of West Australians. The majority of politicians honestly think they're doing the right thing for this country. They just disagree on what the right thing is. And that's the thing. The majority of Australians disagree on what the right thing is for our country. And so there can't be, almost by definition, one person who'll stand up and say, I'll represent the majority of WA people, because they couldn't possibly do that, because we disagree. That's what politics is about. It's about trying to find some way through those disagreements so that as a country we can move forward and prosper. And yes, it would be nice if somebody could just come along and take away all those issues, but unfortunately it's not going to happen. Or if it did happen, they would probably turn out to be a bit of a prick. Next, a view on the poll, 7th of April 2014. A vote for the Greens was a winning vote for refugees. Forget about the environment or climate change. Cut down more trees to build houses to accommodate the world's population. Young Australian diggers lost their lives defending this country to protect it from foreign invasion. Shame on you all who gave your votes to the Greens. Dorothy Smith, North Perth. I honestly took me a while to try and work out whether this was a genuine letter. I think it is, mainly because of that line about protecting us from foreign invasion. I think this person genuinely thinks that treating asylum seekers within accordance of international law, taking them in, processing their claims, and then granting them settlement if we find them to be genuine refugees, does actually amount to a foreign invasion. That the trickle of people coming here compared to our population is enough to overthrow Australia from within, perhaps. Or that somehow we're having to cut down more trees to build houses. To be honest, Dorothy Smith, thank you very much for writing in a letter that made me laugh. Are you in any way related to Pauline Hanson? Next letter. World's Best Practice, 8th of April 2014. I cannot stomach the bleating in the media about our so-called third world hospitals. I recently spent 3 days in the stroke rehabilitation unit at Swan Districts Hospital, and I could not fault the treatment and care I received. Okay, the building is past its use-by date, but I was not there to admire architecture. What counts is patient comfort and well-being. I have travelled extensively, including in third world countries. I have not seen or heard of a better system than ours. Michael Tooby, Darlington. Okay, here's the thing, Mr. Tooby. When the media or anybody else bleats about our hospitals having third world conditions, they're not saying that all hospitals in our system at all times have third world conditions. I mean, obviously that's not true. We do have a good system, but there are failings within the system, and sometimes those failings are so severe that they are likened to third world conditions. Now, this might be a bit of hyperbole, but actually, to some extent, if you think of the medical care that people are receiving in, say, remote Aboriginal communities, they may well actually be as bad as a third world country. In fact, that was pretty much the basis for the Northern Territory intervention a few years back. Now, the other thing is, I'm glad you went to Swan Districts Hospital and had a great time. And yes, Swan District Hospital is a bit old. It was opened in 1956, I believe. And you know what's scary about that? Is that's one of the most modern in the state. Royal Perth Hospital, by contrast, moved to its current location in 1847, I think it was. More than 150 years ago. And so the fact that Swan Districts looks a bit old but is doing all right, there are a lot older hospitals out there. King Edward Memorial Hospital is from, I think, 1916. So, yeah, although your limited experience of 3 days in one small unit in a small, relatively modern hospital in WA is hardly the kind of experience that I would base your reasonable judgment over the hospital system. I will trust in people who've got a bit more of a broad view of things. Anyway, that's it for this week. I only had a few letters this week because it turns out that most people are actually quite sensible. Well, at least they were this week. Actually, mainly because they were writing into the paper to complain about Palmer, and to be honest, I couldn't fault them on that because Palmer's an absolute lunatic. That's it for this week. I'll see you all next week, where we'll find out what's happening in the West. Bye.